I'm a fun guy.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today's show is also brought to you in part by Hotels.com and Grip 6 Belts. We are wrapping up the season in review series of podcasts, and we're doing that by looking at the Toronto Raptors. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. Of course, I did wait until after Game 5 with the thought that maybe the Raptors would win it and close out the series. Of course, the Golden State Warriors won that, extended the series to Game 6. But the majority of what we're doing in these shows is looking at the regular season performance, because that's what really matters for fantasy production. So while this is a season review for the Raptors, their season clearly isn't over, and it could be over in Game 6, and it's definitely going to be over after Game 7. We're focusing here on the regular season for this Raptors team. A team that went 58-24, 2 wins less than the previous season, second in the Eastern Conference. Big win over the Magic in the first round of the playoffs, 7-game win over the Sixers, and then that huge comeback over the Bucks after going 2-0 down. And as I mentioned at the time of recording, they are 3-2 up over the Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals. They had the 15th best regular season pace, 5th best defense, 5th best offense, and of course a lot of that fueled by the acquisition of Kawhi Leonard in the offseason in exchange for DeMar DeRozan. And Danny Green didn't do too much to hurt that either. They had the 9th most blocks and steals in the NBA, 7th best 2-point percentage, 3rd best free throw percentage, 3rd best effective field goal percentage, and limited their opponents to the 4th worst overall effective field goal percentage. So doing it offensively, doing it defensively, no one should really be surprised given the state of this team and the players and the personnel that they do have on this squad. For this upcoming offseason for the draft, they only have pick 59. Pick 29 has gone to the Spurs as part of that Leonard deal. And of course, the big question is what happens with the fun guy himself, the board man, Kawhi Leonard, who has a player option that he will definitely be declining. Does he return to Toronto? Does he go somewhere else? Of course, if they win the NBA championship and he does leave, I don't think that the Raptors fans will be too disappointed, but that's the big turning point there. Marc Gasol also has a $25.6 million player option for this season as well. Plus, Danny Green, Jeremy Lin, Jody Meeks, and Eric Moreland are all unrestricted free agents. Paddy McCaw is a restricted guy again after that weird season that he had, and then non-guaranteed for Malcolm Miller and Chris Boucher. I think Boucher gets brought back. I think they'd look to bring Danny Green back, but it just depends on what sort of salary, as he's an unrestricted guy as well, and they'd love to bring both Leonard and Gasol back, assuming Gasol does opt out, which we haven't heard any word on. Just at this point, they're not really, outside of those guys, they're not going to have cap space. They've already got $127 million of guaranteed salary. I suppose if both Gasol and Leonard opt out and leave, then they will have some cap space. But if that is the case, finding someone to come and replace those guys, they're not going to get that caliber of player for just the 40, or 2 of those players for just $45 million. It's going to be a bit of a tough ask to do that, and that could push forward a little bit of a rebuild there in Toronto, depending on how things go in this upcoming off season. All right, let's move on to talk about these players. But before we do that, make sure you are subscribing to this podcast, and the best way to do that is using the Himalaya podcast app. It's free and has every single podcast that you love or you are searching for. You can follow your favorite show and give individual comments and ratings for individual episodes. Share your exportable playlists as well. Find and download Himalaya on the App Store or Google Play, and don't forget to follow Locked On Fantasy Basketball when you're there. Let's look at these guys now. We have to start, of course, with the fun guy himself, Kawhi Leonard. Played just 60 games during the regular season with his load management. He also had some injuries during the season as well. It wasn't just all rests. We do have to remember that. Had an ankle problem and some leg tightness, ankle problem at the start of the season, at the start of November. Was it ankle? A leg/ankle, and his thigh is clearly bothering him, and it appears like it's going to be a problem for a long term. I still think that load management is a real risk for Kawhi moving forward, heading into next season. He was a guy I was pretty okay about taking in the first round. He ended up for a total value this season as the 8th best overall player. So it's still pretty solid value there for Leonard. Sorry, not 8th best overall player. He was a second round player on total value, 9th best on a per game basis, averaging 26.5 with 7 rebounds, 2 triples, 3 assists, 1.8 steals on 50 and 85. Just doing exactly what he does after that disappointing 17-18 season in San Antonio. The rest are a concern, and this leg problem, it's not something that's going to go away. And the team that he goes for, they are going to need to preserve that lead because we have seen what he's able to do in the playoffs, and having a fully healthy Kawhi Leonard during the NBA playoffs is obviously paramount to a team going as far as they can. And I think you'll see, while he might not play 60 games next season, I wouldn't expect 75 plus from the fun guy as we move forward. But he was obviously magnificent on a per game basis. Didn't lead the team in PIPM, interestingly enough, was actually 4th behind Siakam, Green, and Lowry. So that's a little bit curious just as to how that actually panned out in terms of those advanced numbers for the fun guy himself. In terms of his on-off, he was a plus 5.2, again, behind Siakam, Green, and Lowry on this team, and behind Marc Gasol. So while he was excellent, it wasn't him entirely dragging this team through in the regular season. In the playoffs, he's obviously upped his game, but in the regular season, there was some ups and down moments at times for him, but overall, it was a pretty successful season for Kawhi Leonard. The next player we look at is Kyle Lowry, had an ADP of 26, the 24th ranked player on a per game basis. He played 65 games, 34 minutes, only 14 points, but it's 5 boards, almost 9 assists, 2.5 threes, and 1.5 steals, where his value comes from, as well as the 83% from the line. And shot 41% from the field. Not a great number, but this is a guy that 2 years ago was averaging 22 points and now all the way down to 14, but making up for it by improving that assist number and being that solid second round guy. He is 33 years of age. You can expect, I think we'll see if Kawhi does leave, I think we could see Lowry scoring go back up to 18 points per game and push back and be a back end second round guy. But a guy that has had injury concerns in the past, another year older, he might be a little bit of a risky play in that second round range for next season. But still, another strong year from Lowry, plus 4.04 PIPM. He was a plus 9 in his on-off. Really, really strong stuff, even though that scoring dropped as dramatically as it has over the last 2 seasons. He was excellent and should remain in that sort of a role. But the big surprise, of course, out of pretty much anybody in fantasy basketball was Pascal Siakam. He had an ADP of 141 and ended up as a top 50 player. He was a guy that I took in quite a few drafts with my last pick. I thought, okay, I think he's going to play more minutes than Serge Ibaka this season. I think he's going to be at least a marginal breakout candidate. I had no idea this was going to happen. I didn't know that he was even going to be a starter on this team when we started looking at them in the preseason. But 32 minutes, 80 games, 17-7 with 3 assists. He hit a 3, he had 0.9 steals and 0.6 blocks, and really so much value came from the 63% true shooting, 55 from the field, 79 from the line, and 37% from 3. Siakam's improvement was absolutely astonishing. He only played 21 minutes a game the previous season, but if we look at it on a per 36 basis, the improvements are crazy. He went from 12.5 points to 19 points. He went from 0.6 threes to 1.1. That's double. The rebounds and the assists, they stayed the same. His steals and his blocks, they actually decreased on a per minute basis. But what happened was his efficiency. A 16 percentage point rise in his free throws from 62 up to 78, plus double the free throw rate. And his field goals went from 51 up to 53, and his threes went from 22 all the way up to 37%. That is a huge jump, and that is why Siakam went from the 209th ranked player into that top 50 player that we saw from him this season. Is there an element of a risk of regression there from Siakam? Well, maybe if that free throw shooting doesn't stick, I think it will. Could the three-point shooting fall off? He hasn't been a great three-point shooter during the playoffs, so that might have an element of risk there. He's been unbelievable throughout this season. There's no doubt about that. Second on the team in PIPM, led the team in wins added, plus 10.9 on off, a huge positive offensively and defensively. If Kawhi does leave, can he ramp up that usage and still remain as efficient? 20 usage with 63% true shooting is really good, but can he maintain that 63 true shooting? If the usage has to go to 25%, that's the real concern. He showed an ability to really scale up this season, but can he take that to another level? If Kawhi is back, I'm not sure how much changes with Siakam for next season. Maybe the 32 minutes a night, it goes to 33 or 34. Can he be a 20 point per game scorer? I think that's maybe a little bit of a stretch for Siakam if this team returns intact. I think that he might be one of those guys that's a little bit Victor Oladipo-esque, that's at risk of being overdrafted. People might look, look at the improvement. He's 25. He's 47th ranked player this season. I'm going to pick him at pick 30 because I've got to get Siakam. And that might be just taking away any value you can get from him. I do think there's a risk of that. I look at what he can do. I look at those numbers and go, where does he get better? Well, the steals and blocks can improve, so I guess there's room to improve there. The scoring, maybe that can go to 19 points per game, so there is some room, but I just worry that if this team is back intact, that we might see, because even if that efficiency, which, again, his field goal percentage was by far his best fantasy category, a Z score of 1.29. His next highest category was scoring at 0.25. So you're talking 5 times more valuable in field goal percentage than his second highest category. If that goes from 55 down to 50, that is a big drop off. And that's almost a 20-30 spot drop in rankings just by having that sort of a fall. And that could really impact things. Even if the scoring goes from 17 to 19 and he gets 1.1 steals and 0.8 blocks, marginal increases on this season, when his number is really, really dependent on that high field goal percentage. If that drops off, then there could be a little bit of a fall and a little bit of disappointment. But I'm not saying that's going to be the case for sure, but it is something to pay attention to. Let's look at Marc Gasol now, the 50th ranked player overall, just 31 minutes a game. Most of his big numbers came as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies. His time in Toronto, he didn't play that many minutes. He got an opportunity when Ibaka was suspended and hurt at the end of the year. 31 minutes, 13.5 points with 8 boards, 1.3 threes, 1.1 steals, 1.1 blocks, a triple-one guy with his 45 and 76% shooting. If he is back in Toronto with this same core, he is not a guy that we're looking at in those first 4 to 5 rounds. He's probably that 70 to 90 type player. That's if he's going to be playing 26, 27 minutes a night. I think that's a realistic expectation. He was really important for them, though, defensively, plus 2.5 PIPM, a huge plus 9.3 on-off during his time in Toronto, really shown out during the playoffs as well. But as a fantasy guy who just marginally scraped into the top 50 this season, if he remains, and even if he doesn't, even if he goes to another team, I'm not sure we're going to get any more top 50 seasons out of Marc Gasol at his age where he's 34 and a half years old. Today's show also brought to you by Hotels.com and by Grip6 Belts. Go to grip6.com/lock for ultra lightweight belts with no holes or no flaps. And don't hate like your French trip. Go to Hotels.com to book yourself a great vacation. Be there, do that, get rewarded. Let's look at Serge Ibaka now. Going to turn 30 in a few months' time, just 27 minutes a night. At the beginning of the season, he alternated that starting role with Jonas Valanciunas. Then Valanciunas got hurt and he remained the starter. Then Gasol came and he went back to that bench role. Like Gasol, Ibaka's the 70th ranked player this season. That is going to be hard for that to hold next season if Gasol returns. And what he did was to be able to maintain his value, because he was actually a better player this year than last year, is he took his field goal percentage, which had been at 48% for 4 consecutive seasons. He took that field goal percentage all the way up to 53% by basically eliminating three-pointers out of his arsenal. He was taking 4 attempts per game over the last 2 seasons. He was down at just 2 attempts from 3 this season. He did not hit them well, 29%, but when you're limiting your attempts, that enabled that number to jump back up. He also hit his his twos at a higher rate at 59%, whereas last season he was hitting them at 56%. So an improvement there. The usage also jumped up in his smaller role, and the block rate from him about the same, that 1.4 to 1.3 blocks, a long way from when he was averaging 3.7 blocks back in his Oklahoma City Thunder days. Ibaka was actually a neutral on defense, a plus 0.37 PIPM overall, and a plus 0.4 on on-off. So really just a neutral player for this squad. And I think that if this center rotation of Gasol and Ibaka is back in business next season, that he will struggle to be a top 100 guy. Because again, like Siakam, that value really did come through because of the field goal percentage that he was able to provide. And if that falls back off to where he was for literally 4 consecutive seasons, that is a little bit of a concern for his overall numbers. Dan Green, the 107th ranked overall player, really only one category which he is good at, and that is three-pointers. He's an excellent shot blocker for a guard, no doubt about that. 0.7 blocks per game, 0.9 steals, but only 10 points, 47 and 84, just very, very neutral type numbers, with the only real green category being his threes. And that's fine for a roto league. He's just not a real game changer in head-to-head formats. It was an improvement from where he'd been each of the last 3 seasons, played more minutes out of the Greg Popovich system, hit more threes. The blocks actually did decrease, but his efficiency jumped back up to 43% from 3. The last time Danny Green had a 40% three-point shooting season was back in the 14-15 season when he was the 43rd ranked player overall. So good to see that shooting come up. He actually shot 46% from 3 this season, a really large part as to why he was even in consideration for standard leagues. The advanced stuff loved him, plus 4.49 PIPM, led the Raptors in that metric, a positive both offensively and defensively, and led the team in on-off, a plus 14.2. He is underrated just how impactful he is as a player. It doesn't all necessarily translate into great fantasy numbers, and he's more of that 14 to 16 team league guy. 32 years of age, probably got another 2 years in him at this sort of a role. Not sure that he's going to be a guaranteed top 120 guy or anything along those lines. It's all going to come down to, is he hitting 2.5 threes? Probably, but is he doing it at 46% or is he doing it at 39%? Because at 39% it hits his overall field goal percentage way down, and that drops quite a bit of his value. And I think that we'd see a bit of a fall in those overall numbers from Danny Green if that isn't able to stick at the level there where he was at this season. Fred VanVleet played more minutes this year, especially with Delon Wright getting traded, 28 minutes a game. It was a little bit of a down season for Freddie. He had 11 points with 2 threes per game, 5 assists and 2.5 boards with almost a steal on 41 and 84%. But he did have value as that 12-team league guy at times, mainly for his assist numbers. This is a guy that shot 43% from the field last year and 41 from 3, so a significant drop-off in his overall efficiency. If those numbers were back up in this larger role, and I think we see him play an even larger role next season, I reckon we're going to see VanVleet come in as probably a top 120 guy. Can he top out as a top 100 guy? Maybe. I have a lot of faith in him long-term as a player. I think that maybe when Kyle Lowry is gone in 2 years' time, or potentially gone, or limited role, VanVleet can step up and have a 1 or 2 year season. 1 or 2 season run as maybe a top 70 guy. Plus 0.6 PIPM is okay. Plus 2.9 on off is really strong, especially you playing as a backup and playing behind Kyle Lowry, although he does play alongside Lowry quite a bit. It wasn't his best season, especially early on, VanVleet, but got it together at the end. I think things are still pointing up for Fred, as his playoff run has really indicated. He's got a lot to give. Jeremy Lin is on this team. He was really poor for the majority of his tenure in Toronto. He had some moments in Atlanta, but didn't do a huge amount. He's going to be 31 in a couple of months' time. The 218th ranked player overall. I think our hopes for him ever being any sort of top 150 or even top 200 contributor in fantasy basketball are probably shot. He was a negative 4 PIPM during his time in Toronto and a negative 13.3 on-off. That just is an absolutely horrible number for Lin, and I think that the game has caught up a bit to him, especially recovering from that patella tendon injury, which cost him all of the 17-18 season. Storm and Norman Powell, his 17-18 was really poor, but he bounced back in a strong way. 19 minutes, 9 points, 2 boards, a 3, 48, 83, and 40 is his percentages. True shooting of 60. That's really, really strong from Powell. He had moments in the playoffs of some big games, but his overall advanced stuff was not great. A negative 2.8 PIPM, a negative 7 on-off. It just so much of that goes to show how strong that starting unit is. This is a team in the past whose bench unit has been really, really strong. The best bench in the league. This season it was the starters and the bench really struggling. So it was a big changeover for how the Raptors run things, but it was a bit of a bounce back from Powell. I did have some faith in him being able to put up some top 100 seasons at some point in his career. I'm sort of out on that at the moment, and I think he's sort of settling in to at least be the 9th man on a roster. The season before, he was like the 14th man on that Raptors roster, which was so strong and had such an impressive bench. Another guy that was pretty disappointing this season is the Jedi, OG Anunoby.
Hello there.
Really bothered by quite a few things. Had appendicitis at the end of the year, the death of his dad at the beginning of the season, and it just wasn't anywhere near the same as what he was as a rookie. Only 20 minutes a game. I thought he was a chance to start alongside Kawhi at the 3-4 instead of Siakam. His play down the stretch in the playoffs last season as a primary defender on LeBron James was unbelievably impressive, and then just couldn't carry it on. 7-3 with 0.7 steals on 45 and an abysmal 58% from the free throw line. This is a guy who had really high steal and block rates in college and has not been able to translate that to the NBA. We're 2 seasons in, almost 140 games or over 140 games played for Anunoby through his career, including playoffs, and the block rate is it's abysmal. So maybe that's just not coming back for him. I do think that the death of his father really did impact him this season. And heading into his 3rd season, if guys leave Green, Leonard, there is going to be openings there in that wing rotation. So a fully healthy season from Anunoby, one where hopefully he's recovered and has grieved appropriately. I still think he can be a solid enough fantasy guy. And I think he's a very significant buy low dynasty player. He's got to be a better offensive guy. He's got to shoot better as well. He shot 37 as a rookie, but down to 33 this season from 3. But it was a real step back for OG, who had looked like the potential, not necessarily of a star, but someone who could really be a solid starter. PIPM, negative 3.81. Wins added, negative 1.24. That's horrendous. Negative 8.9 on-off. The Raptors on-off is wild. There are some massive numbers there. Delon Wright was a negative 11. CJ Miles is a negative 15. Greggy Munro is a negative 15. Like, just horrible, horrible numbers in terms of on-off stuff for some of these teams. And, of course, the big numbers for all those starters. Jody Meeks came in and played a few games for this team, but he's not really a player that we should be considering. A guy I do like if we're looking at long-term options, they've got Eric Borland, Pat McCaw, Malcolm Miller, my brother Jordan Lloyd, who didn't really show much, although Lloyd had a little bit of flashes at times. The guy I'm interested in here is Chris Boucher, though, a guy who put up some unbelievable numbers during the G League season, led the G League in PIPM by a significant margin, plus 8.7. The next highest guy was plus 6. That just shows you how big of a difference there was, or how dominant Boucher was through the G League season for Raptors 905. He was the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year in the G League, putting up some really strong numbers. So let's look what he did in the G League. 27 and 11.5 with 1.3 steals, over 4 blocks, 2.2 triples on 32 attempts per game. He had a PER of 30, a usage of 30. He was a monster. If Gasol leads, when Ibaka ages out, I think a Boucher has got value in a similar vein to Christian Wood, 3-point shooting, shot blocking, but a guy that can actually rebound and score with volume as well. He is a name. Now, he's 26 years of age, so that limits him somewhat, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him have somewhat of a Dwayne Dedmon type breakout at some point in the next couple of seasons. So to me, he's really a name to watch with that dominant season in the G League. Now, his time in the NBA wasn't superb. He played for the Warriors last season on a 2-way as well. I think the Raptors should be looking to bring him in on a full-time contract this season. He was really impressive, but there is some upside there, more so than guys like Moreland or Malcolm Miller or Lloyd, all those guys at the back end of the roster who are old, 27, 26, and 26 for Moreland, Miller, and Lloyd at the back end of this roster. While Paddy McCaw, a guy I had some hope for, it was a really lost season for him, just 29 games. And my faith in him has declined significantly. What I liked about McCaw in the past was a guy that could maybe pass and create a little bit, but generate a high steal amount, and that hasn't really come through for him. Although he did have 0.8 steals in just 14 minutes a game, which is not a bad number. That's where his value is going to come. Can he be enough of a defensive pest? I worry that he's just not strong enough to guard up to the wing enough, and the offense and the shooting has been a real struggle for Pat McCaw through his NBA career so far. That'll do it for the Toronto Raptors season review. Of course, their season is still going. Maybe they win the championship, maybe they don't. Tomorrow we'll be back with an NBA draft preview show with Cole Zwicker of the Stepien, so stay tuned for that. Mock drafts, more draft preview stuff coming after that. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball, and don't forget to subscribe to this show. Use the Himalaya podcast app, and you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and on Spotify, and on YouTube. Give it a thumbs up, like it. That's thumbs up, the same thing. Subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff that you know can really, really help the show. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. the board man, Kawhi Leonard.